Oh, my hat!
The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a novel by American writer Mark Twain. It follows the story of young Huck Finn, a boy growing up and learning the ropes of life, and Jim, a runaway slave who wants to gain his freedom. The pair escape society and travel down the Mississippi River, where they encounter many adventures and a number of new friends and enemies. By chapter 16, Huck and Jim are separated after their raft was hit by a steamboat, and Huck ends up on the doorstep of the Grangerford family. Over the course of chapters 17 and 18, in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain is able to integrate themes, symbols, and satire, whilst developing the character of Huckleberry Finn through significant events that leave a lasting influence on the boy. Huck finds his way to the doorstep of the aristocratic Grangerfords. Led by Colonel Grangerford, the family live in a grand home in rural Kentucky and take Huckleberry Inn under the name of George Jackson, and he bonds with their young son, Buck. Buck is like Huck in both age and situation. They both have family problems. While Huck has an abusive drunk for a father, Buck is entangled in a long-standing family feud. More on the feud later, though.
Oh, hell no!
Something significant about Huck's arrival is that it is the first time someone is
George
suspicious of the
Jackson.
boy.
Are you a
In
shepherd?
the past, he has been welcomed
No.
with open arms
Oh,
and has
okay.
often taken advantage of this. However, the Grangerfords greet Huck with a barrel of a gun and vicious guard dogs. This serves as a metaphor for Huck's situation. He is unfamiliar with his surroundings and completely out of his comfort zone. The safety that was the raft has been lost, and the naivety of his past encounters is nowhere to be found in the Grangerfords. Huck has entered the real South, a land of uncertainty and distrust, and there is no way for him to escape it. The security that Huck needs is fulfilled by Buck. Buck is essentially a less developed Huck. He is young, educated, and full of life and desire for adventure. His fatal flaw, however, is his obsession with his family's honor. Buck is willing to sacrifice his own life in order to help his family win their feud. This vicious loyalty to blood is a trait Huck has never had, stemming from his lack of attachment to Pap or the widow. In the meantime, Huck explores the Grangerford house and mingles with the family. He admires the furnishing of their grand home, like their brass doorknobs and brick fireplace, as well as their large book collection. He then stares at the various paintings hanging around, taking note of a number he calls crayons. These were done by a recently deceased Grangerford daughter named Emmeline. He finds them to be quite macabre, and learns she also wrote poetry. Whenever someone would die, Emmeline would write a poem, but no one wrote one when she died. Huck tries to write a poem himself, but he finds he just isn't up to it. The leader of the Grangerford clan is Colonel Grangerford. Colonel Grangerford is a grand patriarch. He is tall, clean-shaven, well-dressed, as well as kind. The colonel's good manners seem to spread to those around him, and he is loved by all in the family. He is the polar opposite of Pap Finn. Pap Finn is an abusive alcoholic and is greedy and borderline murderous. He cared nothing for his son, desiring only to take Huck's fortune at any cost. He is dishonest and lacks any manners, and is unkempt and unclean. They are the extremes of civilized and uncivilized. Comparing the differences between the Colonel and Pap helped to show the grand difference between the high life and the poor life. Colonel Grangerford is an ideal father figure, while Pap is the lowest of the low. Because of his status being civilized, the Colonel is able to provide for whatever his children may need or require, while Pap practically forces his child to fend for himself. Pap, being uncivilized, lacks any status, along with his poor manners and life choices. Huck basically says the Grangerford family is so dang purty. Besides Buck, there are his two older brothers, Tom and Bob, and his sisters, Charlotte and Sophia. There used to be more Grangerfords, but they were killed. By who, you may ask? By the Shepherdsons, their neighbors and the rival aristocracy in town with whom they've had a long feud with. Buck explains to Huck that the two families have been engaged in a blood feud for decades, and that he isn't even sure why. Huck experiences the feud firsthand while hunting in the woods with Buck. They encounter young Harney Shepherdson on horseback. Buck fires at him but misses, hitting his hat instead, and the two boys run back to the Grangerford home. By having these feuding families, Mark Twain is creating a parody of Shakespeare's classic Romeo and Juliet. The Grangerfords and Shepherdsons represent the Capulets and Montagues. However, this feud is much more violent. In the original, the families could walk past each other without breaking out into a fight. But in Mark Twain's parody, the families will shoot as soon as they see each other. Mark Twain has taken the romantic tragedy story of Romeo and Juliet and tossed it into a bloody pool of reality. On Sunday, both families attend the same church sermon. Twain creates a parody of the perfect Christian family. They go to church but carry weapons. They are taught brotherly love and go to war with each other soon after. Though the church is a holy place built on the ideal peace, the peace it brings is only temporary. The families resume their fighting after church is ended, showing that the lessons taught in the church are futile in changing the family's morals. The religion that makes them good serves to only elevate their aristocratic ego. After dinner, Sophia Grangerford calls Huck into her room to ask a favor. She left her testament back at church, and she needs him to retrieve it. He finds the church empty, save for a few hawks. He retrieves the book but is confused. Why is she so worked up over a simple testament? He shakes the book and discovers a note with 2:30 written on it. He takes the testament to her and she tells him it is just her bookmark. He makes nothing of the note and goes on his merry way. Now this is all good fun, but what do the hogs mean? Well, the hogs represent the feuding families as though they have the facade of a proper moral family. They revert to their savage nature at an instant. Though they headed church like a Christian family, they still wield their weapons in order to fight and kill each other later. The hogs are a symbol of being uncivilized. The Shepherdsons and Grangerfords are uncivilized as they cannot change their savage ways, despite the church's best attempts. Behind their aristocratic facade, they are primal, savage pigs. After the delivery, Huck goes out to the river to study, and a Grangerford slave finds him and asks if he would like to visit the swamp to look at some water moccasins. While suspicious, he decides to follow and is surprised to find Jim napping in the swamp. Jim tells Huck that he didn't follow Huck because he was afraid of being captured, and that he'd been repairing the raft since they were separated. After the happy meeting, Huck returns to the homestead to sleep. Huck wakes up the next morning to find that Buck is missing. He asks one of the family slaves about Buck and learns that Buck has gone off to fight the Shepherdsons, and that something big is going down between the family. Huck runs out to look for Buck, and upon hearing gunshots, climbs up a tree. He watches Buck and another Grangerford hide behind a wood pile near his own tree, and it calls out to him. Buck explains to Huck that Miss Sophia and Harney Shepherdston escaped together and the families went to war as a result. Colonel Grangerford and Buck's brother have already been killed. But during this conversation, the Shepherdsons were able to get the drop on Buck and his ally, attacking the pair. The two try to escape into the river but are shot dead before long. Huck stays in the tree until night, thinking about what he's caused. If he had told the colonel about the note, the fight wouldn't have happened and Buck would still be alive. Huck is growing up, realizing the consequences of his own actions. The death of Buck symbolizes the death of his own innocence. He covers up Buck's face, crying a little. Huck has changed. He has witnessed the gruesome death of his close friend. Moreover, Buck was a near mirror of the young Huck. He makes the wise decision to avoid the homestead and heads towards the swamp to look for Jim. The death of the Grangerfords would serve as a good cover for his disappearance, making it the perfect time to return to the river with Jim.
However, Huck finds both the raft and Jim to be missing and goes on a search. He finds Jim quickly. Turns out he'd been looking for Huck and gotten the raft ready. The two set off on the river and leave behind the death and destruction of the blood feud.
When Miss Sophia and Harney Shepherdston attempt to run away, Mark Twain creates a what-if scenario by asking what would happen if Romeo and Juliet didn't die. In the original story, due to the sacrifice of Romeo and Juliet, the families were able to end their feud. However, in the parody, Huck's Romeo and Juliet do not die, and as a result, the families kill each other until no one else can fight. The romantic tragedy becomes a horrible, bloody one. This is a great example of how Mark Twain uses satire within the story of Huckleberry Finn.
Chapter 18 closes with Huck remarking, "We said there weren't no home like a raft after all. Other places do seem so cramped up and smothery, but a raft don't. You feel mighty free and easy and comfortable on a raft."
Throughout chapters 17 and 18, Mark Twain develops the character of Huckleberry while developing a number of themes. Through satire, he develops the theme of religion making people better. As though the feuding families were very religious and held the church highly, their religion served as a mere distraction to their savage nature. He also develops the theme of uncivilized versus the civilized by contrasting Pat Finn and Colonel Grangerford, that are polar opposites and extremes of both sides, but still share a primal desire for the bad, be it violence or booze. The jarring and violent events are shown to have a lasting influence on the young Huck as well. He is shown to consider consequences in hindsight, while still possessing his quick wit and cunning. Through this relatively short period in the book, Huck has become more mature. A prominent example of this is how he reacts to finding Jim. He plays no prank or tells no lie. He is ecstatic and happily embraces Jim as though he were his close friend. He values Jim more than he did before. Twain also sprinkles in clever use of symbolism, such as in Buck. Buck's naivety and innocence parallel that in Huckleberry, and his violent death symbolizes the death of Huck's innocence. Huck's various encounters reflect how he has lost both mentally and physically. He doesn't know his surroundings, and he's uncomfortable with them. He's also uncomfortable mentally, away from his security of the raft and his friend Jim. The hogs at church symbolize the savagery of the feuding families, while behind their facade of great aristocracy, they're still at their base very savage. The most significant part, however, is the way Twain executes it all. Huck's transformation feels natural. Buck, though a symbol, feels like a real character and acts as so. Huck's reactions feel normal and logical and make his development all the more interesting and relatable. The incredible hyperbole of the feud still feels realistic. Twain's attention to detail keeps the story fresh and makes both the characters and the themes of the book stronger. At the beginning of the video, we claimed that in chapters 17 and 18, Mark Twain is able to integrate themes, symbols, and satire while still developing the character of Huckleberry Finn through significant events. And as he accomplished this, well, yes, Huckleberry has changed significantly. He's growing up. The jarring events of the chapter have changed him very, very much, as well as he cleverly integrates satire, parodying Shakespeare, parodying the church, and using symbols such as Buck and the hogs. This all goes to show you that there's much more to the story than what's on the page. Though this may seem like a scene out of an action flick, there's actually much more to it. There are many themes, satire, symbol, and character development sprinkled in within it that make it much more significant. And it is techniques like this that cement Huckleberry Finn as one of the greater novels of American literature.